Welcome to the Better Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm Ciaran O'Connor.
I'm John Wood Jr.
What's up, John?
What's going on, Ciaran?
I'm good, man. It's been a minute. I feel like I haven't talked to you in 2 weeks.
Well, you haven't seen me in 2 weeks, at the very least. Back in L.A.
Back in
from
LA.
the East Coast.
That's right. It was good to be home. Got to see my family. July 4th, got to grill up some Franks, have a beer or two.
Nice.
You know, I discovered that July 4th is the day on which there is the single largest amount of consumption of alcohol in the United States.
Huh. Well, I guess that stands to reason. That's one way we celebrate our patriotism.
Indeed, it is.
We get loose.
How was your 4th? Did you make the founders proud?
Well, if I think so. I mean, I good conservative that I am. I reflected on the greatness of the country, our founding ideals. Not that a good progressive would do the same thing, of course. But I also, my mom cooked up a slab of ribs. Took the kids out to see Grandma. And, did a little bit of barbecuing ourselves and spent some good family time together. So wasn't complaining.
And as a good progressive, I should say that I actually attended a reading of the Declaration of Independence.
Indeed.
In the town square of Stonington, Connecticut,
Nice.
From whence my grandma once hailed. And yeah, it was very patriotic. And I also was really struck by the eloquence of the founders. I mean, you always know they were eloquent, but when you actually read it, they were using words like contiguous and other words that I didn't know until I looked them up.
Right, that's right. Words like consigned to oblivion, as I myself must soon be. That is a reference, by the way, to George Washington's farewell address. A phrase from George Washington's farewell address is authored by Alexander Hamilton, and which was quoted in the musical Hamilton in a song that Ciaran and I performed at the Better Angels convention, with Ciaran playing the role of Alexander Hamilton, myself as George Washington, and that was a lot of fun.
That was special.
That was special.
Is that video online?
That video is on YouTube. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes,
so if everyone wants to hear me and John sing, which I totally understand if you don't, go check it out on YouTube. It was a really special night, I think, for us and for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it was, and the convention, just as a whole, was really a remarkable, spectacular, really, sort of event.
So, how did you feel right when the convention ended? What were the emotions going through your body?
Right when the convention ended, well, I was on this sort of euphorious. Is that a word? Euphorious.
Euphoric, perhaps?
I think
I like euphorious, though.
Euphorious.
It's got some swag to it.
It does. Well, I was sort of in this sort of euphoric high and optimistic and hopeful about our ability to just sort of touch each other's minds and hearts across the vast kind of political distance that exists between us. And, I'm not sure how anybody could have participated in that event and not felt hopeful in that way, because the relationships and the bonds that were established and built upon, and the deliberation we went through together as a body. So we had 250 delegates out, evenly split between Reds and Blues from all across the country. We came together.
All 50 states.
All 50 states came together, passed Better Angels platform for 2019, participated in debates and workshops, made music together, and in the concert on the last night, broke bread together, and had some spectacular events and panels, including one with Hawk Newsom, leader of Black Lives Matter in New York, and Ray Warwick, leader of the Tea Party in Cincinnati. Now, that's not an event I got to see. I got to see live because Ciaran, you and I both were participating in a debate on American identity with the wonderful Miss Lexi Hudson, as well as Adam Garfinkel from the American Interest, and Ken Bone.
Bone, the Bone Zone.
Shout out to Ken Bone.
In the flesh.
Man.
He's charismatic.
He was great. Very sorry we don't have a video of that to pass on to you folks, but Ken brought the fire to that debate.
But yeah, the Black Lives Matter discussion, which we have a video of, so it's on YouTube, but I'm going to re-download it, put it on, and send it out just so everyone can watch it. It's really fascinating. It's David Blankenhorn, the president and co-founder of Better Angels, moderating a discussion between Hawk and Ray. And yeah, it was pretty interesting. It's not quite what you'd expect, but it was very in keeping with the vibe of the convention. And I know that when the convention ended for me, my heart felt open. I remember saying, I'm not a very religious person, but I felt like it was preordained.
Indeed.
Whatever that means, however you interpret it.
Indeed.
But it feels like to me, coming out of the convention, we are really taking things to a new level. Better Angels has gone from an idea to a bus tour to seeds across 5 states, 10 states, 15 states. We are now truly national. We are the largest grassroots organization dedicated to this work, which is one of the most important tasks facing not just our polity, but our society and our culture. And coming out of the convention, we have a growing cadre of leaders, coordinators, alliance leaders, organizers, moderators, debate chairs, students, activists, men, women, children, people of all walks of life who are going forth to grow this movement and grow our work and really start to take on the institutions that dominate American life.
Right.
Whether that's the media, the academy, politicians. We've already been active on college campuses with debates and in high school so that we want to equip high school seniors with the tools and experiences they can use to know how to communicate across difference. So when they join college campuses in a few months, which a lot of which have become cauldrons of polarization, they're going to be leaders and they're going to sort of help contribute to the generational impact of this work. And the last thing I'll say is that coming out of this convention, we are ready to lean into 2020. We are not trying to get everyone just to get along, forsake their positions, come to the mushy middle. We want people to get out there and be passionate. This is an important election. The stakes are high. We are very divided. These are crucial issues that are close to home, that affect you, that affect your family. We want people to advocate, to be activists. But we also want people to act in good faith, and we want to try to take America to a place where we can engage with respect and empathy and compassion.
Yeah, and to do democracy the right way, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I tend to think that one of the things that we need to really actively seek to conserve in our society right now is just kind of a constructive civic culture, something that that allows for us to sort of lean into our faculties of reason and to set the context and the space for us to actually develop an understanding of the other person's position enough for us to be able to see where the meeting points are. And that's part of what Better Angels is increasingly making possible for Reds and Blues in various parts of the country through the alliances that you mentioned and through the various Better Angels debates and other programs that we have that give people the opportunity to speak constructively about things that actually matter and to potentially organize together in order to advocate on behalf of policies or other initiatives that Reds and Blues might find some common cause in. And I think that the real goal here is, yes, to provide outlets for people to be able to do just that sort of thing wherever they may happen to be, but also to sort of establish a new norm in our society, in our political culture, whereby this simply becomes the way we do politics in the United States. And so we have a goal coming out of the convention over the course of the next few years to strengthen our presence in all 50 states. We have some key areas and states that I think we may be paying special attention to going into 2020. But ultimately, the idea is over the course of the next several years to build Better Angels up into a membership organization that's at least 1 million strong. And that's a heck of a goal, I know.
That's a bold goal, man.
It is. But at the end of the day,
I believe it.
I
believe that we will win, to quote the soccer chant. Shouts out to the women who just won. Very inspiring.
Well, right. And I said earlier today, I said to somebody, I said that if something needs to be done, it's you damn well better believe that it can be done, because I don't really think we have much of a choice in the matter. I mean, fundamentally, we I think our back is to the wall as a nation in terms of making a choice about what kind of country we want to be and what kind of a political society do we want to be. And I know that most people, or many people at least, will see that choice as a choice between, right or left.
Or the choice of the election.
Right, the choice of the election. But I am referring to something that I think is a bit more fundamental than that, because even if your guy wins, and even if your guy or gal should be the one to win, as far as the presidency is concerned, if we find ourselves in a state of perpetual, Cold War with one another, Cold War that might warm up a bit depending on the circumstances, that's not going to be the foundation by which we can maintain and build a stable and prosperous society for our children and for our grandchildren, for future generations of this country. That's not a question of a single election cycle. That is a question of the American people themselves and how it is we choose to work together. Right?
And the spirit with which we do politics.
That's right. Well, that's the fundamental thing. What spirit do we bring to this? And, and you and I both recognize the difficulty of this. Bill Doherty, who is co-founder of Better Angels, the architect of Better Angels Red Blue Workshop, and so much of our programming. Really, Bill is kind of our philosopher in chief in many respects. I call him the priest, or the high priest of Better Angels. But
the
Bill,
OG.
He's the OG. That's right. Shout out to you, Bill. Bill appeared on Minnesota Public Radio recently.
That is one of the best interviews that we have done to date. I recommend everyone check that out.
Highly recommend it. It's up on the conversation page on our website. You can find it. Go to our podcast section.
He faced some tough questions from Blues.
He did, from people who were basically saying, look, what you're saying sounds nice, this idea of, empathizing with the point of view of other people, but at the end of the day, the stakes are just too high for that. Things are just too serious. We have kids being taken from their parents, locked up on the border. We have a president who is, uniquely corrupt and so forth. This is, again, Blues calling in to this radio show. We don't have time to put down our arms. We've got to fight the fight where we stand. And Bill, and I won't do justice to Bill's responses because, he was just too spot on for me to do it justice. But Bill, first of all, made the point that, the passion is real, the passion is authentic, the passion is justified, and there are Reds who feel it just as strongly as the Blues who are calling in. But that ultimately, if we put ourselves in a position to where we no longer look at people with differing points of view on these sensitive issues as being not just wrong, not just perhaps potentially misguided or misinformed, but in all reality, our personal enemies, then there is no basis upon which we can continue to have a functioning society or any sort of any kind of a culture between us that would allow us to live in peace with one another. And it's interesting to make this point, but really depolarization in this way is the only practical option available to us to be able to keep a society together that allows us to accomplish the things that Reds and Blues value. Because if the system falls apart, if our social fabric tears, then nothing else is able to stand.
I totally agree. I think one thing that came out in that interview was the moral dimension that people really struggle with, especially Blues, but I think Reds as well. And I think Blues, even despite their best efforts, may feel, well, they're not my enemy, but they might be my moral inferior. And not to say that in a condescending way, right, but to say that they find President Trump morally abhorrent for many reasons that I could get into, but I don't necessarily need to. I think anyone who's been following American politics would know why Blues, have issues with him morally. And they then extend that to people who support Trump. And the frame that Bill put around it, which I thought was very useful, was the "how could they" frame.
Right.
And it's just sort of, flabbergastedness, if that's a word. How could Reds support this man?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't come up with a good answer to that, then it's a lot harder to escape that natural moral value judgment that you want. But with exposure, you learn, A, that people have all sorts of reasons for supporting someone. Some people voted for President Trump because he's President Trump. Other people voted for him despite the fact that he is President Trump or is Donald Trump. And you start to understand why people voted for him, and it makes it more difficult to simply invalidate that as a moral failing.
Right. One of the key things that Bill said in that interview was that for precisely, again, he was speaking to a very left-leaning audience, I think, but he said that in precisely the case of somebody who votes for someone who you consider to be abhorrent, one of the vital things to keep in mind is that there is a life story and a life experience behind that vote. You know, that person who went into the ballot box and cast a vote different from your own, that is a person with a story to tell that if you knew that story would allow you to have some insight into who that person was, that would make it much more difficult to hate or revile that individual. And also, I think, much more possible to communicate with such a person, you know, and obviously the same truth applies to Reds with respect to Blues. It's remarkably difficult dynamic, but it's rewarding, as we saw at the convention. When you're able to understand the stories of the people with whom you disagree, you can find the bridges of commonality and actually build something on top of that.
And you can find respect and admiration, even if you still completely disagree, and even if at the end of the day your reaction is still, but seriously, how could you vote for this guy or this woman or whatever?
Right.
Even if you never fully understand why you, if you were in their shoes, might vote that way, you can understand how they arrived at their position, and you can sort of, I guess, respect their choice. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yes, and I think that at the very least, look, in understanding why somebody does the thing that they do, it doesn't require you to agree with it. It also doesn't require you to stop pushing back against it. But I do think it arms you to be able to do that both more effectively in terms of your ability to reach and influence the person on the other side of the conversation, but also with less psychological damage and harm done to yourself. And that's the other part of this too. I mean, we carry around this hatred, or at the very least this contempt for one another. That's something that's harmful to you, right?
It's a lot of letting go.
It's a lot of letting go, but
just
the trick is to let go of the enmity while holding on to your conviction for what you believe in. You know,
exactly.
And, I mean, I know for myself, I'm going to continue to advocate for an American politics and a culture that highlights the values in localism and in faith-based community, in the free market, and in all sorts of policy and political areas that I think conservative values highlight and speak to, which are valuable and needed and necessary. But it doesn't keep me from being able to look at your points of view, Ciaran, politically, and say, well, look, I can understand the liberal argument on this issue, and here's the kernel of truth in it, and maybe there's some way in which my solution to a problem can borrow from some element of your perspective, and perhaps vice versa. And even if we can't arrive at some policy common ground on things, we can be big enough to say, okay, your guy won the election this time, or your policy got passed this time. Let's see if we can't make the best of it, and if I don't support it by the time the next go-round comes around, that's my opportunity to make my rival case. And that's just the process by which we ought to be ordering our society at the end of the day. It's a constant back and forth. That's the point of it, There's no, Bill said this too, he said there's no vanquishing of the other side. That's not how this works. So the question is how can we sustain loyal opposition to each other in a way that allows us to be fervent in that opposition while still getting things done, and while still having a healthy sort of society. That's what we're going for.
And even if one party were to vanquish the other party, that's politicians.
Right.
That's not people.
Right.
And I think that distinction is important to keep in mind. And I, for one, will continue to advocate for the progressive positions in which I believe, from climate change to gun safety to reproductive rights, etc. But I will continue to expand my circle and to try to keep my arms and my ears open, even as I'm bringing people in so I can maybe whisper in their ear, hey, what do you think about this?